Hi, this is Nate Schulte, and I am going to be talking to you a bit about a battle that is legendary in the United States Marine Corps history, which is the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir. It happened in the 1950s. What happened was that General MacArthur was trying to drive the North Koreans out of South Korea since they had captured Seoul or retaken Seoul from the North Koreans. They were driving them further north to the Yellow River, and that river was pretty much the boundary between North Korea and China. But China actually got involved due to this battle. You see, the reason why MacArthur wanted to pretty much stop at the river is because he was afraid that if his men were to set foot into China territory, that could actually start another World War. Now, World War II had been over for about 5 years, and Korea was supposedly supposed to be a police action, as many veterans have said. But to the lesson, this happened on November 27th to December 15th, 1950, with 12,000 United States Marines there and a few Army men from America, and about 120,000 Chinese soldiers. Now, the Marines, there were some Marines that spent the night over at Kotori here. They were there just to rest for a little bit. They had a Thanksgiving dinner. It was cold turkey and stuff, but because it wasn't very cooked, some of it was kind of frozen, or so I've read in March to Glory, which was about the Chosin Reservoir. There were some problems with digestion or ingestion. But some of the men woke up the next morning of the 28th to about 2.5 inches of snow. Another thing that was very difficult about the weather with this battle was there were temperatures that were about 35 degrees below zero. And they didn't have enough winter clothing or any ways to keep them warm during the fighting. So there was frostbite. Some guys actually lost toes and everything, and it's just not a pretty sight. But on November 29th, the Marines left Kotori here, and they were going to go through a passageway here, which was about 11 miles long, and it had about twists and turns all over, and there were hills all over, which the Chinese used for cover. This was going to be known as Hellfire Valley, and you would probably understand that a little bit afterwards. Hegaruri was the supply depot here, and this was pretty much ran by PX people, cooks, and bakers. So there was pretty much no combat troops or troops that were meant for combat there, but they had to defend the East Hill because the Chinese were attacking, so they had to use pretty much engineers and PX people and the bakers and the cooks to try to fight off the Chinese there. Now, Hagaruri was a supply depot, and it also had an unfinished airstrip, so supplies had to be dropped in by parachute and everything. There were no planes or anything able to land on there. And the engineers were really tight on time. They needed that airstrip because that was very vital to the Marines, so that way they could, evacuate wounded and everything later on. The thing to remember is that at Udamni, which was a village, there was about 8,000 Marines stationed there, or assigned there to guarding. Over here, there was about 400. Now, there was a trail here, and there was a lookout point in case that, these guys had to retreat here. They would still be able to retreat in case somebody, was to attack them there, which almost did happen. And as for Hagaruri, there was 3,600. In the east here, there was about 2,500 Army guys and about several hundred South Korean troops. Now, On November 27th, the Chinese attacked in the east here. But as I just stated recently, there was an 11-mile valley here called Hellfire Valley. What happened at Hellfire Valley was that there were roadblocks and mortars and machine guns that were used against the Marines as they were trying to get through there. Now, what happened was trucks were getting destroyed there, and the motors, and not only that, according to some veterans in the documentaries that I have, which will be my sources for this episode, the trucks almost looked like Swiss cheese. So you can imagine that. But what happened was, half of the convoy there, I don't have enough trucks here, but there was like, imagine 3 trucks. There was a truck here that, because there was too much fire, they went back to Kodori, while the one in front managed to make it to Haguri, and the other one was left behind pretty much, and they were captured. So, and it was the middle of the American convoy. That's what happened over there. The ones that did manage to make it to Haguri from the convoy here, their next job was to try and get East Hill here. With East Hill, there was 200 Marines on there, and it was above an ammunition depot and supplies. So, if you shoot, you could possibly have a sniper there that would actually end up, shooting at the ammo dump, and you can imagine what would end up happening with that. Or if they have motor and they're accurate, sayonara, baby. Right. But then the Marines from Kodori were able to relieve the Bakers and the support people, or Marines here, so that way they were able to actually do the fighting. They got to the crest or near the top of the hill, and then they were really just firing away with what they had. But by this time, the status for the Army guys here was unknown. Radios were not functionable during the cold because it was so cold out, so the radio equipment didn't work very well. You couldn't call for anything, not for airstrikes or anything just yet. And something else that happened was that the wrong supplies were dropped at Haguri. So, like supplies that, bullets that, or rounds that did not fit the machine guns or anything. All that was wrong. The Army commander was airlifted to Haguri with a message, and they thought it was that help was on the way for them, but unfortunately, no. There was no help here, so the Marines and the Army were on their own. And by December 1st, the first Marines on the west began to journey back to Haguri here. And after 4 nights of fighting there, while coursers from carriers covered the Marines, and in fact, I happen to have a model of an F-4U Courser. As you can see, this is an airplane that they did use from World War II. This is what the Marines were famous for flying during World War II, and if you've ever seen the TV series The Black Sheep, this is pretty much the type of airplane that they flew. This thing would drop napalm bombs and also would do strafing runs. In fact, some of the veterans in the documentaries that I've watched have said that they would fly so close to the ground that you could see their faces. So they would do strafing runs, which would be like they would fly down as low as they can, and they would use machine guns to, wipe out. It's almost as low as a bombing run. So those airplanes were pretty much giving them cover. There were some other airplanes that were used as cover, like Air Force guys. Unfortunately, I didn't get the information of which kind of airplanes they were flying. And what happened eventually, the soldiers at here knew that Hong Dong-ni is where their tank company was. And since they were on their own and there was not much of information about what was going on, so they decided to try and see if they make it to the tank and see if they can make it to Haegu-ri. Because with the tank, they have more firepower to them, and not to mention the fact they're a good cover in case, the enemy fires at you. But they wanted to get back to Haegu-ri. And so that's what happened. Okay. And then there was a time when they got everything to Haegu-ri, and there was 2 trucks that ended up being abandoned and were captured, and that had the wounded on board during one of their advances to the rear. On December 3rd, everybody was regrouped at Haegu-ri. The landing strip was completed, wounded were evacuated, some were taken to Tokyo, and there was frostbite and everything. And then on December 7th, while Haegu-ri was being disassembled, the next step was to go through Hellfire Valley again. Only though this time the Chinese had artillery fire. Now with that, you're out in the valley like that and you're being fired upon with artillery. It's more effective firepower for the enemy and you're pretty much sitting duck. But after they got to there, they got to Kotori. Then they tried to actually go all the way back, but there was a bridge that was destroyed and they needed a replacement here. So they ended up doing an airdrop to actually make a makeshift bridge. And that had to be completed. So they airdropped everything. And this, like I said, was never done before. But they tested it and it actually worked. So they made a bridge, a makeshift bridge, and it took everybody 2 days to get everything over the bridge. But while the bridge was being built, they actually decided to bury the ones that were killed because they didn't want to carry them, which is understandable because you only can carry what is vital. Had you left anything to your enemy, they can duplicate it and then they can figure out ways to counter you. Whether if it's a bulldozer or whether if it's artillery, doesn't matter. Eventually, after everybody was over this bridge, they made it into the Japanese Sea and then they got on board and then they were out. Now the casualties for this battle were, for the Americans, there was 1,225 killed, combined with the Marines and the Army. For wounded, there were 4,380, and 7,313 were frostbite and had ingestion problems. As for the Chinese, 25,000 were killed, and for wounded, that's unknown. My sources for this are, there's an episode called Against the Odds. It's a series that talks about military history. The episode is Bloody George at the Chosin Reservoir, which was directed by Sammy Jackson. My other sources here are this Korean War magazine, which has about 4 pages about the Chosin Reservoir, which was published in 2013. And then this PBS special of Battle of the Chosin, which was directed by Randall McClary. Some other books that might help you if you're interested in learning more about this battle. Check out the book Colder Than Hell. And then there's one that I've read already, as I stated, March to Glory. I hope you enjoyed this learning about the Chosin Reservoir. Stay safe, stay healthy. For all veterans who are watching this, thank you for your service to our country. Thank you very much. Good day.